Let's turn on the welcome to Evolution Out. There's our cute little Peter's logo up a little bit so people can listen to my clocks and type mechanical things. And there's the logo, guys. I am James R.J. Downard. TortucanWordPress.com is my training wheel website. All sorts of material there. My goal, anti-evolutionism, one source at a time. And there we go. So I can now stop sharing and get rid of that little thing. I'm worried about the prospect of whether or not I've got roboting or anything from too many videos and things going on, but such is life. This is a crapshoot. Anyway, howdy gang. We've got Brooke and Jackson here, which we'll be introducing and talking about a variety of things. We got hi Brian in the room, and as usual, the main topic, of course, is contested bones, where I'm going through doing the full source analysis of this anti-creationist, and then there's little side issues. I will do apology. From last week, I got so sidetracked that I think I forgot really to discuss the Islamic creationists that I had put a link up to. It was not a giant omission because basically it was them attacking Dawkins and putting up a bunch of authority quotes. So it wasn't really a big firing thing. But this time we got a variety of stuff on the table. Little bit, and then we'll be talking about my upcoming debate I'm going to have right after this one, and then the Gigantopithecus and intelligent design, which is the main element of stuff. And also Jackson and I can give a little heads up on the book we're working on. So we should be able to fill an hour, but I definitely don't want to go too much over that, because by 6:30 I will be up and debating with Standing for Truth, who is a young earth creationist that I've interacted with slightly before. And it's on the subject matter of the biblical worldview versus the evolutionary one. And we'll just talk worldviews and source methods and a whole bunch of other stuff. So as soon as I get a linkage on that, I'll be putting that up on Twitter, and I'll be hitting up Modern Day Hysteria pretty much as soon as this is over. Anyway, that's a little diatribe on that. The chapter, yep.
I was going to ask, did they not see your complete and utter just destruction that you did to Hovind? I mean, you laid waste to Hovind and this guy one time.
Well, you think they should be a little bit intimidated by me, but then again, they're Tortukans. And so the full-blown Hovindistas say, oh, Hovind did so well. He always does so well. And if they can imagine that he did well, then, boy, they're going to think that it's doing well. So I'm sure the believers are absolutely always convinced that they're absolutely right. Meanwhile, the outside world goes on in its own way. And
I feel bad for the kid, honestly, just because he doesn't know what beast he awoke.
Do you know how old he is, by the way? Standing for Truth?
I'm not familiar with him at all.
He sounds like he might be in his early 30s-ish. But okay, I'll try to find out, because if he's born anytime after the early 1980s, I literally will have been researching the creation evolution issue longer than he's been alive.
Yeah.
So that does put a slightly different perspective on things.
Right. Yeah. I just was sorry for the bad joke and sidetrack. That just, yeah.
Oh, but bad jokes are what we have you on the line for, Brooke.
Oh, is that why? Okay, well, then it's a good thing I'm on video today, because, I mean, you don't get much more of a worse joke than this.
Yeah. Anyway, it'll be interesting because I'll be winging it. Yeah. Because I haven't been following Standing for Truth in any great detail, so I don't know a lot of his apologetics. I bumped into him a little bit. Jackson says he's a Hovindista, and that puts him in a ballpark right off. Anybody that can be a Hovindista has obviously got to be missing a few oars in the methods water, and right off the bat. Anyway, going back to the Australopithecus sediba and that little area there, I've only put one link up because it relates to Brian Switek, which is one you can get full text. And the thing that intrigued me, though, I put a little reference to this one footnote that was put up where I will read it in its entirety. It was AAPA Meeting Briefs, Science, 2010. What the hell is that? I have no idea what they're referring to. Whether it was a summary somewhere, I tried to find a reference to it in Science magazine. There was no volume number because there's more than one volume number in the year 2010. So you would have to have multiple volume numbers to be able to specify it. So it's meaningless references that pops up every once in a while in parasitical secondary source citers, that they glom onto something and they copy the reference as best they could, and they don't standardize it. Everybody, if you are a masochist and want to go through my reference bibliography, all 2,000 some odd pages of it, you'll discover that I have a standardized format that I use for everything, where I want to put up the volume number, the full page number, the entire title of the journal. If it's changed its name, there are some that used to be called one thing and now it's called something else. I think Journal of Experimental Zoology, I think it used to be called something else. And so I put that in because some older references will be to the old name of the journal and the newer ones are different. So I want to keep it all up to date. Even Origins of Evolution in the Biosphere has changed its name over the years to where it's slightly different now than the way it used to be. And as a scholar, I want to make it as easy as possible for everybody to follow up. Don't take my word for it. Certainly don't take creationist word for it. No, you want to follow up the material and locate the material yourself. Anyway, the interesting thing about Australopithecus sediba, which is the subject of the chapter that I'm diving into, is that it's showing more and more of the range of these late Australopithecines and whatever it is that's turning into the first Homo genus. And you still have Homo habilis. There's still dispute as to whether or not Homo habilis is actually a couple species. We have very few fossils. There are fragment chunk of skull here and a little bit of a hand here. And how much of it, it's tricky. Eventually, we may get super lucky. The fossil genie that I described so much in Evolution Slam Dunk may come through and deliver unto us a beautiful full-blown skeletons, and it'll clarify. But what is based on what we can see so far is the old view of evolution, which was a ladder of progress where there would be the species A that turns into species B, which turns into species C in a nice ladder of progression, more and more complex and more typical. No, you have shrubbery, you have bushes of cousins, and a mass of ecology. One lineage will move through into there, but the other lineages don't necessarily die out. There may be even some interbreeding going on that have Neanderthals. To know exactly which one of those is closest to, remember, cladists don't even bother about direct ancestor-descendant relationships. You're talking about sister class. Which one is the to the split, it's up for grabs. You have some like Berger who like to push for Australopithecus sediba, even though others point out there are aspects of it that make it seem more like a sideline. And so you still have ones that relate to other groups of the Australopithecines and then the Homo habilis bunch. And Switek covers a lot of the issues why there's such uncertainty about it, because you're talking about multiple character traits, and it's far enough back that we can't look at so much of the detailed genetics except by future retro engineering. By the way, with one of the things that I added in with the Sanford section and a paper that Jeffrey Tompkins alluded to on the same thing about Adam and Eve genealogies and how supposedly the genealogies could be explained by genetics and haplotypes. That when you looked up, he relied on a really old paper from the 1990s. And it turns out that there's been work since then. And we now actually have literally hundreds of archaic human and pre-human DNA to look at, literally. Yeah. So now we can change. It's about mitochondrial mutation rates. Yeah, jump in.
You mean science actually updates their knowledge as they go on? They don't just stick with one. What kind of crazy talk is this? I mean, aren't you supposed to stick with the first answer?
It's like it's building on things, isn't that, Sam?
Oh.
Yeah. the neat thing about this new information is that it was designed to, they were able to test out mitochondrial mutation rates. And although mitochondrial mutation rates can fluctuate in a variety of circumstances, they could look at these ancient genomes to see the overall track record of how accurate it was. And it turns out it clusters in to about, I think it was 2 point something or other times 10 to the minus eighth of mutations per replication or some such thing. I've got the details in the book. Jackson will want to fact check all my little info coming up in there. But the neat thing is that we've got so much of this information where we don't have to worry about it directly. So why the hell is Jeffrey Tompkins in the 2015 period relying on a 1997 article? Why? Because it had an authority quote. Because it happened to refer to, if this mitochondrial rate stands, then why it would pull some of these things down to only the mitochondrial Eve down to 6,000 years. Well, ooh, he just pounced on that as a, aha, this confirms the Bible.
Oh God, no! The mitochondrial Eve is only the most recent. Yeah, you know, it's like
you get the
lowest common denominator. See, you can have 10 and 20 as the denominators, but you know what? 10 is also a common denominator. So is 5.
But if you remember my discussion
the lowest common
with Joshua Swamidass a little while ago, that on this very issue about that, there's more than one genetic Adam and Eve. That you will have multiple couples that you can, the farther back you go, and we were talking about hundreds of thousands of years before the species crystallized, pre-human Homo sapiens. That's when you can find these couples from which all modern DNA in human populations will have stemmed from, this one and that one. There are several of them because of the way that the populations mix and that sort of thing. But population genetics is not exactly a hot field in anti-evolutionism.
No, because
I got to make sure I've got my thing here, whether or not I.
Which is funny because it literally underlines the definition of evolution, which we owe in part to population genetics.
I was about ready to say, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean that should just discredit all anti-evolution, because isn't evolution just the change in the genetic populations over any given population over a set period of time?
Yeah.
Like
so yeah, that is literally population genetics.
Yeah,
population genetics is the definition of evolution. So
yeah, I know, it's like,
and arguably one of the giant blind spots, and I think standing for truth illustrate that one of the uniform blind spots in all is their inability to conceptualize series of parts. And that mutations and macroevolution are all involving populations of organisms that have a huge and fluctuating variety and interacting in ecological ways, and their microbiomes and lateral gene transfers, and all of these multiple layers are all happening simultaneously. That would cause steam to come out if they're looking for some single thing, but they don't get that far. So there's no legitimate systematics. There's no legitimate analysis. A lot of hide the ball to where, Darwin bad, Darwinism bad, no Darwinism. Or what is their model? What do they think happened? Were there created kinds? If so, how many created kinds? How do you delineate what they are? And so what you find in this Sanford book, and what you find in virtually any anti-evolutionist, is that they have an argument they're against, but they don't really lay out what they would be for or what they would accept to change their mind. And that's an absolutely super critical problem. And I think I probably am roboting at some point. And if I am, I plead terribly guilty, and I'm very, very sorry to everybody.
Well,
I don't know what to do about it, because I've got my menus trimmed down as much as I can.
They can't change their mind because the Bible can't ever be wrong. So what would it take to change their mind? The Bible to say it. Well, the Bible is pretty much as much as we can say, like, set in stone. So they won't ever change their mind. It never will, unless they can actually somehow realize, oh crap, the evidence is just too overwhelming for me to have to, and the Bible's wrong. Once they can get past the Bible being infallible, That would be
interesting. Have a non-negotiable dogma, and there have been scientists who have had these same kinds of blind spots. That's why, again, I recommend people read Planet of the Apes, my chapter in TIP Project, where I went through the history of how they worked out what they thought was going on with human evolution. And politics played a role, and nationalism. One of the reasons why Piltdown was accepted for so long is because the British paleontologists really wanted a Briton on the field. These damn German Neanderthals and these Asian Homo erectus and Java mans, where is a proper British ancestor? We need to have a British ancestor. And so there was an attraction to that. Even that stupid Nebraska man, which was in 1920 for about 5 minutes, where the guy misinterpreted a molar, which was it was an easy goof to have made. But the thing is that we were Americans and we're running the world and we're beginning to be superpower. And shouldn't we have an American ape ancestor over here to beat out those damn Europeans and Asians? And so there was a tremendous desire to have those sorts of things. But science doesn't give a rat's ass in principle about what you want to be true. You want to find out what actually is true. And what we can see is that, like, another big debate it's almost a dead letter now is the out of Africa versus multi-regionalism. And you had Walpoth on the multi-regional side, and then you had the out of Africa gang, and they were practically fistfights going on in the 1970s and 80s. Well, now that we knew there were multiple species that were surviving, and we know more about how gene flow was occurring, that it turns out both of them were right and both of them were wrong. That you had multiple pulses out of Africa, you had population demes and avatars shifting back and forth. We found out that the African apes, before they left Africa, had spread way farther into the continent than we had originally thought. And I'm going, well, duh. Is this shocking? No, yeah. It's perfectly understandable when you think of populations of organisms.
Yeah, there is there's been quite a few different quote unquote mass exoduses from Africa within human lineage and ancestry, right?
Yeah. And they're able to spot more and more of it. We get into the same issue in relating to Native American creationism, which some Native American tribes are of the opinion they were created here in situ. So they came out of a cave in the earth somewhere in Nevada, and that's it. And so the idea that their ancestors actually came in long migrations tens of thousands of years earlier, whether by boat or by foot, is something that is ideologically impossible for them to accept. The science is what it is. And to me, it's so much more interesting to find out what actually happened.
Yeah,
to find out within my own lifetime, to see that we have Neanderthal DNA and Denisovan DNA.
Yeah.
And we can discover that bits and pieces of it we're their descendants in a way.
Almost all of us have Neanderthal DNA. I was actually a point I was gonna bring up is I love asking Gex this question whenever they say, oh, we're all descended from Adam and Eve and Noah. All right, if we're all descended from one person, why is it that, African American and Black people don't have Neanderthal DNA, but all the other ones do? I mean, if we were all descended from the same people, shouldn't we all have the same things? It doesn't make sense.
Exactly, and that's one of the things I'll be bringing up in the debate, the double bottleneck that occurs. That all created animals must have been representing all the ones that you see in the fossil record. So all of that diversity had to come about in only about 1600 years. And then a second bottleneck when all those animals were put on the ark, and then they re-diversified into a completely different set post-flood.
RJ, God works in mysterious ways. Who are you to question God in the scriptures?
Yeah, well, there's a difference between mysterious and damn cussed perverse. And
sorry, I had to get a
hold of that stuff. Yeah. Anyway, I got to keep an eye on the time and all the stuff to do. We'll slip off into Bechly because that's a real fun bunch. I put a link up to his video. Denise O'Leary, that intelligent design water carrier up in Canada, had made a link to it on Twitter. So that's how I found out about the thing. And it took me a couple of weeks before I actually got around to seeing it. And then I was sitting up into the wee hours because I wanted to do an source analysis of it, because he didn't. I, in fact, put a note up. Anybody that goes to the video will be able to see my comments that I put up. And and I'll say there's only 500 people who've seen it. So they haven't exactly set the house on fire in terms of viewership. And I don't see any comments on it. So, or at least my comments that I put up since then. But the thing is, it pissed me off that here is a scientist being interviewed by Jonathan McLatchie. And they don't think to put the links up to the technical papers that are being alluded to. Excuse me, Jackson, you do that. I do that because you owe it to your damn readers. This is the 21st century. They got mouse click. What good is it for you to mention a technical paper in a video where you can't get access to it? You put it in the damn description.
Exactly.
I skewer Kent Hovind on that very point in our debate.
Yeah. It's lazy not to do that. And that means that the reader, the viewer, can track the sources and can make up their own mind. They can see whether you're playing fair or not with the facts. And Bechly was just a weird mess. Oh, Modern Day Hysteria just sent me the link for the thing. So after I get off of the show, I'm going to be connecting that up. I'll be putting the links out to the live chat and stuff like that, because I want to be able to have everyone deal with that. We'll worry about that after I'm off the air here.
Yeah.
But anyway, I conducted quite a lot of research on this, and I was up until the wee hours of the morning tracking down all the papers. I was able to get all of them myself, although I put the linkages up to the ones that were open access to regular folk by just direct means. And it was a fabulous example of somebody who doesn't conceive of himself as a creationist, but if you put him and Dwayne Gish in the same room, there's twins separated at birth methodologically. He was bringing up living fossils. He was conniption fitting about biogeography, where he was sounding like Casey Luskin. And in fact, he has riffed off of Casey Luskin. And he managed to bring up at one that I was particularly amused by. He brought up this horizontal tooth replacement issue, which a few taxa among mammals and others have developed a way to replace teeth continuously, and they do it horizontally. But he thought this was a problem for evolution, because how could this have occurred convergently in all these different, the exact same system? Except it isn't the exact same system. And in fact, when I looked up one of the papers, in their abstract, they say this is often confused. The manatee one is often confused with the one in elephants, but they are not the same. And so...
Wait, really? Elephants and manatees independently develop their own methods? Mechanisms?
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Bizarre, because they're both tethitherians. They're literally sister to each other. Good Lord.
And so the thing that was amazing about Bechly is that when push comes to shove, I'm not sure that he accepts that anything is related to anything. And he would be retreat. The thing that really pissed me off is he brought up the marine reptiles in the Triassic. That's a pure Bermuda Triangle defense argument, because the reason why the roots of these marine reptiles are so murky is because we have very few rocks to look in. There's almost no seafloor exposed from the earlier than the Cretaceous. It's scatterings of stuff. I know that Mutani guy in Japan, when he was looking up and found some basal nothosaurs, which are transitional, he had to climb on the top of side of a mountain to get up to this thing on this little island where he's hanging over. I mean, it was just really difficult to get to. And as I pointed out in the video commentary, that submarine paleontology is not yet hit its stride, that we can't go down into the bottom of the ocean and excavate stuff very easily if you can find Triassic deposits. Turtles, he had the gall not only to misspell the damn name of this basal Panticellus or something like that, but he yeah, that's
the grandfather turtle.
He actually implied, if you look at the animal, it has no shell. It's a basal thing from which that later developed. And so the idea that is this not just a beautiful transitional, just how far down the road he went, but because he didn't link sources in many instances, or just did things from authority quotes or curiously old material. That's another one of those dead giveaways. Why are you putting up a 1970s book about a subject when there's a technical paper from 2004 that resolves the problem? Didn't you know about that? I don't know. So Bechly is not marking down any new turf in terms of sound methodology. He's retreading exactly the same methodological problems that you can see in Duane Gish, in any of these fact claimant types that go waving around little bits and pieces. God, he brought up the stupid horseshoe crab as a living fossil, and I'm going, oh my gosh, this is so old.
Oh, I actually,
and he brought up one.
We made note of that in the video I did stasis on how they elongated their tail and reduced their number of thoracic segments and all that stuff.
Yeah, they're not static.
Well,
they're generalists, but
RJ,
not static.
Jackson, I do have a question. Even if they didn't change at all, does evolution require that you have to change, quote unquote?
And the answer is no. And
you
what are the
go
odds
from a
that out
redfish
of
to a
millions of species, that one or two over the course of time would find their little model really useful and manage to get along with relatively little change because it's a nice, durable model? There is no conveyor belt of evolution that requires everything go extinct and everything turn into something else. That's like saying, well, why are there still bacteria? From a Lynn Margulis point of view, our environment is practically everything is bacteria, and there's these little vertebrates with an attitude hovering around, and insects as just little foam on the beer elements. And if you look at it from that direction, yeah, bacteria are doing just fine. Thank you very much. I think even too, I can't remember whether it was Bechly or somebody else that made the mistake of bringing up the idea that why are bacteria still around? Why wouldn't they have stopped evolving? Oh, I think it was Bechly.
I think,
and it was because the paper that he alluded to was a really fascinating one, because it was explaining that because of mitochondria getting into the field in an endosymbiotic thing, it upped the power operation. And unless you had that extra power from all that ATP stuff that's going on, and that's photosynthesis, that you don't have enough oomph to do much changing. So the rest of the bacteria that never developed that, they never made that endosymbiotic connection. That's why multicellular organisms are coming from those lineages that have that powerhouse. And the other ones are basically stuck in low gear because they don't have enough power on it. So it was actually, again, you learn some real science following up on the source material that your anti-evolutionist misrepresents.
Nick Lane's book, The Vital Question, he talks a lot about the influence of mitochondria on the evolution of eukaryotes. Fascinating book. Yeah. Absolutely fascinating.
And the fascinating thing about them is, of all the organelles, they're the only ones that have clung on to their separate DNA down to all of these billions of years. They've never let go of all of it. They've traded some back and forth with their hosts, but always they've kept their little mitts on certain cellular processes, and they're in the driver's seat for apostosis and a whole bunch of things, and that can produce troubles. But it allows you to do mitochondrial DNA studies to look at these two completely independent nuclear DNA versus mitochondrial, to do trackings as to how much things diverged. And then when you look at how the creationist tries to glom onto those areas, they have to play picky-choosy with what data fields they deal with to arrive at the place they want to, but they're not paying attention to most of the data. So I haven't been looking at the live chat to see whether or not anybody's got any questions on that. I've been dithering on. Oh, Immutable Destiny asks, would bacteria that had mitochondria transfer that to others by transfection? You want to take that one, Jackson?
As in passing it through horizontal gene transfer? I don't think so. I mean, that's still trying to figure out researchers are still trying to figure out all the interworkings of how archaeans could have even phagocytized a mitochondrion in the first place. It's like, you know what? They didn't really know much about the cellular mechanisms of that kind of stuff until we found the Loki archaeota just not too long ago. So I don't think they...
Yeah, and there was a new paper I gave you a link to on that they're just starting to do an experiment on two groups to see how that mutualism can start, and that they're investigating in the lab with counterpart things, some of the very earliest stages of that mitochondrial thing. Most of what happened in symbiosis is secondary, tertiary endosymbiosis, to where something that's already a symbiont now acquires another unit or another unit over there. And so you get some really intricate things going on in the red algae and green algae. Some of these things.
Matthew Heron and I talked about.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Heron. I think that's going to be delightful because I'll probably be picking his brain. Michael Heron's going to be my guest on Evolution Hour on January 9th. And I hope we have a really nice discussion on that point. And we'll see what all has transpired down to them. So let's see what's going on in here. I think we're about ready. Let me give my obligatory plug for my CanRed. And again, I'm keeping mindful on the clock because I don't want to run past 6 o'clock much because I've got to get prepped up for the exciting world of debating, standing for truth. Yeah. So there's my 2 patrons. Yeah, shut up, Brooke. And until I'm done. And Stephen and Marigale and Keith and Dyer and Andrew and Eatmeal and Yui and Mona and Hendril and Jen B and Jody and Daniel and Ralph and Nyanya. Or not available, depending on how you want to look at it. Bo Hobo and Eric and Benjamin and Staggles and Alex Stone and Sun Sky Stone and Surus, the fellow who's helping me do the audio book of Fairly as Fog, and we'll do one of Slam Dunk and that after that. So we're biting off a lot. Totis Real, Everett, Tsur, and Paul Williams, thank you all. Behold and partake of #tip at wtortukan.wordpress.com. Use the Tortukan alert hashtag. I'd like to see that one trending. Technically, these are Patreons, but Patreon is slow as molasses for actually getting any money. So for all practical purposes, it's more symbolic. If you really want to help the old RJ, GoFundMe.com, DCGo, and or buy my books. And speaking of which, is it not the exciting stocking stuffer season? So I've got 2 books out there that you can play off of. Evolution Slam Dunk on the sciencing end, and the Paralogs of Phileas Fogg on the novel end. And I'm busy working on 2 books simultaneously, the sequel to Fogg, the 2nd volume, Under the Southern Double Cross, and also The Rocks Are Still There book that Jackson, you little scamp, talked me into doing. But boy, we are going to be doing 2 Answers in Genesis, what I did single-handed against critics of the reptile-mammal transition. And there's going to be blood on the sand when it comes to scholarly analysis.
Yeah, RJ, I have a feeling that you aren't wanting to play nice this round.
Oh, it's a fascinating subject matter, because if you ever had any doubt that the people at Answers in Genesis, Georgia Purdom and Nathaniel Jensen and Jeffrey Tompkins and down in the bottom feeder category, Mike Riddle and Bodie Hodge and all the rest, just are hilariously disconnected from the data field, will be showing just how disconnected they are from the data field. Jump in there, Jackson.
Yeah, if you haven't read Evolution Slam Dunk, it's very good for coming at the reptile-mammal transition, because RJ's book fortifies our wall in this area against creationism. I think that what we're doing with the rocks for there is we will give you a comprehensive understanding of more or less the entire creation-evolution debate.
Okay, yeah,
it's juicy. I'm doing, and I got to still get back to. I just finished up the additions that I was putting into Chapter 4, which was a series of case studies on head up your assism in the Answers in Genesis books on a lot of biological issues. He's got Jackson has been doing a spectacular amount of heavy lifting on this thing. I just love all the systematic material that you bring up. It's just delightful. And then I'm also got to get back then to finishing off the radiometric dating chapter book. I have to finish off the section on the Grand Canyon, and they're the same phenomenon with Andrew Snelling and Steve Austin and Woodmarap and Vardaman and the gang, with how they were. My favorite blip that I had discovered, this is one that in talking about accelerated radioactive decay, in order to pull off that trick, you have to get plasma temperatures that are 200 million times hotter than the sun. This is not very good for the Noah's Ark environment on the Earth.
That's
It's a little toasty. Yeah, it's a little toasty.
I'm going to guess that
you can accelerate. You can accelerate some radiometric rhenium in these can be accelerated and are observed in supernovas. But supernovas are not the sort of thing you want to have going on in your backyard or next to your boat.
Yeah. So RJ, what you're saying is you don't think a wooden boat would survive that type of temperature heat?
No, and of course, I still love the idea that I don't know whether or not I've mentioned it and we want to pin it down and we bring it up. But the creationists who argue that the koalas and kangaroos and the like got to Australia by being shot out of volcanic vents as ballistic.
Which, mind you, the hard vacuum would kill them, let alone the
Did you see this poor little koala?
or even yet the landing would how did anybody think that was serious?
It's like watching these superhero movies where somebody falls out of a skyscraper and bounces off of the thing. I go, my gosh, you've got good ribs. And this may be fine for superhero movies, but it is a little bit awkward for the various critters. I always was amused by the fact that I think the way I described it in Dinomania, another chapter that I would like more people to have read off the tip, is about the idea that all these marsupials got on like this travel junket together, like the group trip on the cruise ship, and all of them blobbed down together as a unit because that's the only place they're known. And I went into a whole bunch of stuff on the Madagascar Tenrex, which Dwayne Gish played around with. So I've got a lot of shit in in Dinomania.
Oh yeah, there's a huge amount of endemic fauna to Madagascar. Same with the Seychelles and those other islands in the Indian Ocean. It's like it's almost as though they were once connected or something.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brooke.
I was gonna say, and the whole argument that completely, if any creation ever brings up koalas and kangaroos as being on the ark and how they got there, they discredit their whole argument because they're now arguing species. But not just that, but the whole connection to it. Don't the creationists believe that the continents were all connected, and then during the flood, before the flood, then the flood broke them up? Not to mention that the amount of force that would take to separate the continents like that forcefully and that quickly would literally be, to quote Marvin the Martian here, an earth-shattering kaboom.
Oh, yes, indeed. Yes. The Illudium 236 explosive space modulator.
Yeah.
Brian brings up stromatolites. Yes, they would suggest long before complex life arose. And in fact, stromatolites are so revealing because they are a window on a very different ecosystem, because they require very unusual environmental conditions for those little stromatolites, which look kind of like hassocks of accumulating bacteria. If they're too saline, or if there are critters that can graze on them, which means once complex organisms developed, it became hot problem for stromatolites, and they started disappearing because now you had other little critters that can come in and basically graze. And the only places on Earth that you can find stromatolites today are places that are hypersaline and so bloody inhospitable to anything. No fish wants to be in there. That they don't have to worry about being grazed. But that means that there's a huge turnover in time frame as you find this stromatolite world. And I mention it in the new chapter that I was working on, where Todd Wood, I think, was the one who was trying to argue, either Wood or Woodmarap, one of the two, that there was like a special area off of the pre-flood world where there was this hypersaline environment where there were all these stromatolites, and that all changed with the flood. And then, of course, he's got hypothetical giant islands of forests floating around in the pre-flood world. And in the flood times, then they're washed up and suddenly fast-baked and turned into the coal seams at the same time that the ice ages are doing in flash freezing mammoths elsewhere, or the Hovian theory that there was the big ice canopy I love the fact that Hovind's theory isn't his theory. He nicked it from Don Patton back in the 1960s. He's not even original. Holy moly.
Wait, wait.
Oh,
Can't
modern day
Hovind
hysteria.
stole something?
I see you're in the room. Yeah, I want to make sure that my show doesn't go past 6 o'clock so I can get over there. Make sure that we've got the links to the live chat for the linkages there so that I can get into the live chat room and we can put that up on Twitter, spread the word on that, because and ideally we'd like to have a good mix of creationists and evolution defenders and all of that, so we can get some really good questions in the Q&A. That you can really tell where somebody's philosophy and their worldview and their factual data set is at Q&A time, because you either go or you can actually answer the question. And I'm itching and raring to go there, hysteria, on this. Okay, I'm keeping my eyeballs on the bit in there. The other fascinating thing about all your marsupials, and this is not true, this is true not just of them, everywhere, is that there's a continuity of the fossil record. This is one of the things that Darwin was noticing when he was going around there, that they were seeing animals in the fossil realm that were making sense as to what lived there now. Well, that was strange. And then another big thing, and I'll be hopefully mentioning it in the debate with Standing in a half hour, is that the whole idea of extinction was not part of the biblical worldview. That up until the 18th century, the idea that anything had ever gone extinct was not in their frame. You looked around and you saw cows and horses and old goats, and there were plants that you were familiar with, and these were in the Bible. So everything was very fixed and stable. That the original creation had gone through the bottleneck of the flood, but it was just a preserver. All the stuff that was in the pre-flood world was carried over into the post-flood world, to the extent they thought about it much at all. So it came as a big shock to creationists and to ones in the new geology realm when they discovered fossils that were not like anything alive today, that there had been extinction. And it was just a moment for Cuvier, and even Thomas Jefferson. He was still hoping there were going to be mastodons wandering around somewhere in Montana, because it was not an immediate idea in that worldview that there could ever have been extinction. Well, by the time you get down into the Darwin 1850s and 60s, oh, there's no doubt that they just kept on finding more and more and more and more. And the fossil thing now, then there was the race on to do paleontology over in America, and you were discovering the dinosaurs, and then you were discovering therapsids, and you were finding the karoo down in South Africa, and it just got more and more. And then worse were all of those naturalists that were writing down the species that they were seeing alive. And it went from hundreds to 1,000 to 5,000 to 10,000 to 20,000 to 80,000 to 100,000 to 200,000 to 1 million. And it just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger all through the 19th and the 20th century. And it's hard to keep up.
RJ, no, we know that those extinctions never happen. You want to know how? They become cryptids and just hide from us. I mean, look at McKinley Mbembe or whatever it is that Hovind loves.
I want to see my dinosaurs. I want to see my dinosaurs. It would be delight on cryptozoology. I have two soft spots. Can you name any paleontologist who would not give their eye teeth or maybe even hawk their grandmother to actually have a live population of plesiosaurs in Loch Ness?
Oh yeah,
holy moly, that would be
sell their mom for that. It could actually happen. I mean,
and my other favorite is the Gigantopithecus. I would be just as happy as clam to see if Bigfoot turned out to be a remnant population of Gigantopithecus. It fits the bill. They're 12 feet tall. They're bipedal. They'd be absolutely perfect. But I'm not holding my breath on this, and I would not bet the farm on it. I wouldn't bet a used candy wrapper on it, because the odds are vanishingly remote. But nevertheless, it would be momentous if it were true. Plus, you'd have the DNA of those animals to look at, and they would just go apeshit over it.
Oh yeah.
So
I love cryptozoology because it's always fascinating. It's always fascinated me. I don't know why. It always has.
Well, it's
I'm sorry,
dramatic.
I don't
It's fascinating. Anybody that's seen Ray Harryhausen movies, and you see dinosaurs knocking around, and you see alley-oop, and the idea of encountering the strange beast, and you even get it on the sideline, you know, when you have things about dragons, even though, you know, when I was watching the remake of Pete's Dragon, which was actually not a bad movie, but I'm looking at this thing that's covered with fur and is a hexapodal vertebrate with wings as well as 4 limbs, and it can breathe fire. I really want to know the evolutionary basis and and also the weight to lift ratio. This animal is big, and the weight to lift ratio, there's no vertebrate that can generate enough energy. Hummingbirds can do it, but they're tiny enough to hold in your hand, and they have to eat constantly. No, this is difficult.
You know, I'm sorry, RJ. I don't share the admiration for cryptozoology or anything like that, especially in light of this recent video I made where I was going through claim after claim after claim.
I think I missed that one, Jackson. I'll have to go back and watch.
Brian Switek, and there are various people that have written some absolutely fascinating, because they're intrigued with it just as a social phenomenon as well as just the romance of it.
Oh,
and so the cryptozoologists tend to be slightly cranks or great romantics, and you have to give them a certain delirious enthusiasm, you know, somebody that's just sure that Mabingabimbi or whatever it is down the sauropod wandering around down in some lake in the Congo.
Trey the Explainer pointed out in his video on there's like this French cryptid that was terrorizing the countryside. He pointed out that cryptids seem to show up either after major films like Loch Ness coming out of King Kong, or during times of political strife. Cryptids seem to show up in places. So.
Yeah, there's a psychological, and the same thing with UFOs. There was a spurt, the alien, the gray alien with the big almond-shaped eyes. That's in part due to the way certain people depicted alien contacts in the 1960s, and that then tropes in and becomes the image that people rely on. In the same way, that doesn't everybody know what Santa Claus and the elves look like? I mean, if you bumped into one of those, you go, "Oh, are you Santa? And are you an elf? And oh, where's our reindeer? Let me see the one with the glowing nose." Everyone has a concept of these things.
RJ, Santa Claus, everybody's wrong about Santa. Don't you know he has horns and long claws, and he takes all the bad kids and beats them in a sack or something like that?
Oh, that's Krampus.
That's Krampus. Sorry,
that's the Austrian version, the sadomasochistic Santa Claus. Yeah. C. Brown is over there declaring in the live chat, more evolution, lies, lies, lies. Yes. And C. Brown, who has never figured out how to do source methods. I'm afraid science is, we await C. Brown to do his great monograph to explain the reptile mammal transition, or anything for that matter. Please, by all means, contact the scientists, harangue them with how you know their field way better than they do, and let us know your reaction to that. I've been urging you again and again and again to do that. Put up or shut up. But I don't think you're ever going to put up, and I'm sure you're never going to shut up. You've got this game in here. Puffaluffagus says, what about Totalosaurus? Is that a new one? I literally can't presume, because some of the names, some of the paleontologists have a damn sense of humor. And so they'll actually be naming some of the things. We still keep finding examples that are pushing the upper boundary of the large sauropods. And of course, we still get newer taxa popping in. To me, I'm much more interested in the early stages of the diversification. And I like the fact that Jackson, in his videos on dinosaurs, have been calling attention to how basic model the early ones are of all of these branchings. And that makes perfect sense from a branching evolution point of view. It's kind of odd for a designer who apparently can't come up with a Triceratops right off the bat. He's got to have 80 million years worth of wind-ups.
He's got to have Psittacosaurids and Protoceratopsians and all these other guys.
Yeah.
You gotta preface with the Ornithischians, prefaced by the Basal Archosaurs.
No, I'll tell C. Brown and every creationist out there and every intelligent design advocate, put up, write your piece, make your argument, and present it, and don't just snark at me. I think it's absolutely hilarious. I'm not a PhD scientist. I'm not a great mover and shaker of the world. Why the hell are you wasting your brilliance on me, C. Brown, when you could be going after the scientists? They've got email addresses. Contact them. Write up your magnificent work and present it to your local college. Find a scientist that's expert in that area and move on them. And either you will discover that they're going to go at what you're saying, or it's mainly you might have to find out that you don't know nearly as much as you think you do. And the idea that you just can go around copying the arguments out of other creationists, and that's all you've done so far, is just repeating their stuff. Well, that's stenography. That is not scholarship. And you may accuse me of being an annoying old fart, and I plead guilty to that. But one thing that no one is ever going to be able to fairly accuse me of is not being careful with the facts and attempting to find out what the data field is and fairly and honestly representing what my view is and putting them out where everybody can see them and deal with them. And I'll tell you that if I'm worried about C. Browns of the world not liking my work, I will say Christine Janis likes my work, and she is a working paleontologist. So that, to my mind, is a much better field of things on that area. So where are we? We're nearing about the end of our hour. We're seeing more little announcements with modern day hysteria. I'll be having the half hour on that one. We should have plenty of time to be able to sync up for all of that. But anyway, there we've got the little upshot of the show on here. I put the link up, by the way, to the Kent Hovind debate that I had, and spread the word on that one. There you see source methods in full flower. I'm constantly wanting to remind people there's a madness to my method, or a method to my madness, that there's an underlying logic about why source methods is so important. It's that it's the universal toolkit. It applies to everything. That anybody who is trying to make a rigorous argument, they have got to use sound method. They've got to pay attention to the data field. They have to work out what they think happened positively, not just snark at a negative. They need to be willing to change their mind. They must have a conceptualization of what would change their mind. And then in the argument, the rough and tumble of the marketplace of ideas, you're going to present your views and others will present their views, and you will try to work out what you think happened and test it all out. And that's what science does, and historians do it as well, where you haven't eliminated human nature and the tendency to push your envelope, but it's got a sound method to where you are documenting and putting your documentation out. You're always fair with the source. And when you see anybody who misrepresents a source material, where they draw off a quote and they've obviously never checked to see whether that actually took place or not, they get it from a secondary source, or they actually misrepresent the content of material. I don't have to guess at the upper level anti-evolutionists who have cited a technical paper and it says the opposite of what they just said it said. That's bad dog. That is not sound scholarship. And you cannot build a sound argument with that kind of a sloppy method. And it tells you about their mind that Andrew Snelling and Jensen and these other people can be floating past the data field so cavalierly and calling it science. Nope, doesn't qualify. And I'm going to be a dig in my heels on that source methods issue. And the more people who join the source methods bandwagon, I think the better it will be for reason and evidence and politics and everywhere else. Oh, by the way, that there's some possibility that there's a fellow that we're contacting on Facebook and that we might be doing a new show with him that's on politics, and source methods applies to politics, and talking about I don't want to have to do it all by myself, so I'm hoping he'll be the one that will be kind of but that's a future impending more of me threat.
So you mean politics? Or you mean politics isn't just for at least the really, really far right, extreme far right? Is it just my only book? That doesn't count as source methods.
Oh, but the problem is this will go after a regressive leftist too.
Yeah,
they've got as many problems as that. If you look at some of the Noam Chomsky's, in fact, I was delighted that Jackson put that little snipe at Noam Chomsky in the new book, because it's all about methods issue. That there are bad historians and pseudo historians on the left and the right There are ideologues on the left and the right. Usually it's on the extremes. You don't tend to find them in the middle, because the people in the middle are ones that are a little more careful about their stuff. But the ones that are firing off the extremes will sometimes press themselves a little bit too far ahead of their data field. And it'll show when you start looking at the source material. So you want to see an even-handed one in this. Susan Jacoby's Age of American Unreason is an excellent book in this area. It's still quite a classic, and she went after a bunch of people on the left and the right about that. Is there much difference between a Dinesh D'Souza on the right wing and Howard Zinn on the left in methods? No. They both have very different political persuasions. Howard Zinn just recently died, and he's a darling of an awful lot of people. They talk about his stuff, but he was a sloppy historian. He was an ideologue. And he was not highly respected by regular historians, even ones on the left, like Arthur Schlesinger. Anyway, that's an aside there. We're just about close to 6 o'clock in here. I know that modern day hysteria is antsy to make sure that we got all our links and everything set up, so we'll have plenty of time to get coordinated. The plan is that debate will be commencing at 6:30, and we'll run about an hour and a half.
Oh, I was saying Mars Day Hysteria. He was saying they thought they were starting at 8:30 Eastern, not. Well, I think you might have been 9:30 thinking, because he said that in the chat.
No, it was 8:30 Central, which is 6:30 here.
Oh, okay. Well, he had Eastern. That's but you'll be there shortly after. It's when we get done here. So I just saw that.
So I figured there was enough time between 6 and 6:30 for me to bounce on over, and because I'll have to restart Twitter and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So anyway, any final thoughts about stuff? Or I'll ask Jackson his current thoughts about where he is thinking in terms of our rocks writing and how it's going.
I think it's going pretty well. I'm excited for the future of the project. I got through with Gary Parker just recently. He had a little
condolences.
Yeah, he had a little nothing chapter. Really, just one paragraph of it was of any interest. And now I'm in Mike Riddle.
Pretty thin.
I'm on another Mike Riddle chapter because you're looking at one also. And he kind of has this long diatribe on philosophy and history where he gets history backwards. So,
what a shock! I mean, for those of you who don't know who Gary Parker is, he dates way back to the old Henry Morris era. He co-wrote one of the classic pseudoscience books of the field with Morris back in the 1960s. I think it was in the late 1960s. And then he's still knocking around. I think he's probably at least as geriatric as I am. But he's been just kind of like an old man of the sea in modern creationism. He's not a major thing. He hasn't done a great deal of stuff. So we're going after the heavy guns that are in current creationism, Nathaniel Jensen and Jeffrey Tompkins and Sanford. I think we'll have expanded a great deal. Buchanan did a really spectacular job of sniping at Sanford, but I'm hoping that we'll have upped the ante even more by bringing in some of the newer material and pulling up, because he did his analysis back in 2010, and some more water has slid under the bridge and more dumb from Sanford on things. So that'll be it. We're just about at the end of the hour, and looking at the last bits of stuff on the show. Keep everybody spreading word about the books and stuff. If you're on social media, now is the perfect season to call attention to my books and let everybody know about it. And if anybody wants to help out at GoFundMe, you know how to get there. And it's easy to do. And I'm plugging away with everything I can as long as I can, plugging as many holes as possible. The current count of source base, I'm at, I think at 57,000 sources in the TIP data field. I'm just coming up on 26,000 technical papers, 64,000 scientists involved, almost 9,000 anti-evolution works written by over 2,400 people, of which only about 60 are fact claimants. That's just sad. I mean, that's a pure measurement of how insular and narrow the argument field is. And I'm measuring what works they're dealing with. And I will continue to point out that the anti-evolutionists are missing 90% of the data field. And since they're missing 90% of the data field, they are not on the playing field when it comes to offering a better explanation, because you can't say, oh, I've got my bacterial flagella and my Lewis overthrusts and these little teeny snippets, and I can dislodge all this other data that you never even bother about. Doesn't going to work. So anyway, we're past our hour. I will be shutting down the broadcast. Thank you for being with us today, Brooke and Jackson. And we'll have fun next week, and we'll now move on to the debate.